It's time for IP in the news. And today we're going to be talking about counterfeiting, our least favorite subject. Since we're in the IP field, we really despise people who take other people's hard work and copy it. And there's a lot of copycats out there. I was just reading this article on the global impact of counterfeiting and solutions to stop it.
And wait, it was by Keith Goldstein, who's a Forbes Council's member and the president and chief operating officer of Verify Me. So we have to give Forbes and Keith Goldstein credit.
Absolutely. But he does say one thing at the beginning of the article: emerging technology often means that we are both victims and beneficiaries of innovation. And it's kind of an interesting point, because as innovation continues, there are people who are copying those innovations. And counterfeiting is really an expensive problem. They estimate that between 1.7 and 4.5 trillion dollars each year are lost to counterfeiters. And just to give you a perspective on what the impact of that could be, at the lowest end, it's about Canada's GDP. And at the higher end of that $4.5 trillion figure, it's equivalent to Germany's GDP. So huge amounts of money are being lost through the counterfeiting problem.
Right. And he brings up 4 points. And one of them that I really like is online brand protection. He says online IP theft is especially devastating for startups whose equity and value are often a measure of their intellectual property. And we do know that Amazon, for instance, if you have a trademark, will help you enforce your trademark against other people on their site. And actually, Customs and Border Patrol, if you have a trademark or a copyright, can help you stop counterfeiters at the border. So if you have intellectual property, there are ways you can use that to stop counterfeiting. He also brings up some other really cool things that are not IP, but are
and so it's the technologies to help combat piracy and counterfeiting are also improving. So now they're coming up with labels that can be individually printed and identifying each product on a package by package basis that allows companies to identify counterfeiters. So if you have questions about aspirin that you bought, they can check the label and they can find out whether it came from the original company or whether it came from a counterfeiter.
Well, he says there's invisible pigments integrated into products or labels from the point of manufacture. I mean, this is like Spy Kids stuff.
I know. It's just it's crazy how it's all going. So anyway, counterfeiting is a big issue. And
we get questions about that all the time. There are things you could do to protect yourself.
And there are things you can do to protect yourself. But I would like to turn things over to our guests now and get their opinion on this topic. Amy, welcome to the show. So good to see you and hear you. Tell us what you think about this whole counterfeiting thing.
It's so scary today because we've got so many creators out there. I think the space has really opened up for creators, different before, and it's so easy to put it out quickly. You click a button, you've got it out on the internet, and I didn't protect it. Now what do I do? So I think we really have to go back to the way it was before, of really protecting things before the internet and saying, how do we keep this content? How do I protect? Like for myself as an artist, it's my job to protect the writers that wrote the music that I recorded. It's my job to make sure that everything out there is completely with the right coding in it, that I don't just send out a copy that isn't protected with the right codes that protect those writers. And so I have to be very careful at what I put out to make sure I'm protecting those that trusted me to record their music.
Absolutely. And as you point out, people put work and effort into creating, and to have it misappropriated by somebody else, I think is really undercuts the value of what you're doing. So I couldn't agree more. So Elisa, what do you have to say?
I think this is every small business owner's worst nightmare, right? I mean, the amount of heart and soul that you pour into developing a product or building a brand is just immense. And I think for me, I always look at counterfeiting more as a large company coming in and taking my product idea and just bringing it out on a much bigger scale with bigger distribution. And I think it's hard, so I think what you try to do is connect with the community, really tell them your story and try to connect on an emotional level. with your consumers so they see the difference of, buying from a small business owner?
I think that's wise, and intellectual property can help, but also it's not the ultimate defense, and lots of times people can't afford to get lawyers involved, especially if they're startups. We do have one client that had a trademark that was confiscated by a huge company for essentially the same goods, and we're in court right now. I'm not going to get into a lot of details on it, but I really felt like the attitude was of the company, the large company was, well, you're small, we don't care, we're going to out resource you. But at the end of the day, there are opportunities to fight those things, and as at least the minimum, you need to have good intellectual property protections to give you something to fight with, right, at the end of the day. So Tisa, what about your thoughts?
That's not a threat for my business, but I've seen it with a lot, kind of like what Elisa was saying. Friends of mine who do have small businesses, who pour a lot of time and energy in that. And I had a friend who had a cupcake business that happened to. So I've seen it, and it's just heartbreaking. I think it's okay to be inspired by other companies and inspired by other products, but it's not okay to steal it.
Right.
It's definitely not a victimless crime.
Exactly.
That was really well said. I think we're all on the same wavelength that inspiration is one thing, outright copying and theft is another thing. And
exactly.
I'm glad you pointed that out. Kenya?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've been swagger jacked a million times when it comes to ideas, right? And concepts. So I guess my question is really for you, Richard, like, what are some initial steps that people can take, whether I guess they hire an attorney or they don't hire an attorney, where they can initially protect themselves from that happening?
Well, that's a great question. Glad you asked. The first thing you have to do is identify the types of things that can be protected. So you have patents that protect technology, you have trademarks that protect brands, and you have copyrights that protect original works of authorship, works of expression. And so you have to kind of go through your list of assets, your intellectual assets, and figure out what needs protecting, where it's worth to invest, where it's not. And that at least gives you some place to start. So, ideas in and of themselves can be really difficult to protect, but if you put it into a software, then you might be able to protect it. Brands are really important, and copyright originates just by creating the work. So our listeners should appreciate that copyrights form automatically once you create a work. So if you create a graphic on a website, that's yours automatically. And so, you should be aware of some of these things, and that's the reason why we're here, is to make sure that entrepreneurs understand and have an awareness of some of the intellectual property potentials. And then after that, it gets more complicated, and you should at least make a friend who's an IP attorney and take them out to lunch or something if you can't afford the fees right away.